The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in April 1882, and by Wednesday afternoon, Lydia Owens found herself standing in the parlor of the dead man's house with nothing but the worn calico dress on her back and $12 to her name. Mr. Harrison had been her employer for 3 years, a wealthy widower who needed someone to manage his household in Parowan, Utah, and she had been grateful for the position after her own father passed. Now Harrison's nephew stood before her, a thin-lipped man from back east who had inherited everything, and he made it perfectly clear that her services were no longer required. "I'll be selling the house and all its contents," the nephew said, not even bothering to look at her as he rifled through papers on the desk. "You have until sundown to collect your personal belongings and vacate the premises." Lydia felt her stomach drop. "But, sir, I was promised room and board as part of my wages. Mr. Harrison always said I would be taken care of." The nephew finally glanced up, his expression cold. "My uncle made many promises he had no right to make. Whatever arrangement you had with him died when he did. I suggest you find new employment quickly." She wanted to argue, wanted to explain that she had given 3 years of her life to this household, had nursed Mr. Harrison through his final illness, had sacrificed other opportunities because she believed she had security here. But the nephew's face told her it would be pointless. Men like him did not care about the promises made to hired help. With as much dignity as she could muster, Lydia went upstairs to the small room that had been hers and packed her few belongings into a carpet bag. 2 extra dresses, some undergarments, a hairbrush that had been her mother's, a Bible, and a small tin containing her savings. $12. It might last her a week if she was careful, maybe 2 if she was desperate. The sun was still high when she walked out of that house for the last time. Parowan was a small town, nestled in the high desert valley with the red cliffs rising in the distance. It was beautiful country, but beauty did not feed you or put a roof over your head. Lydia stood on the dusty street, carpetbag in hand, and tried to think clearly through her panic. She could ask at the general store if they knew of anyone needing help. She could inquire at the boarding house, though she knew Mrs. Fletcher's rooms were usually full. She could even swallow her pride and ask at the saloon, though respectable women did not work in such places and she would be risking her reputation. Before she could decide which direction to walk, a voice called out behind her, "Miss Owens." She turned to see Frank Garrison approaching on horseback, leading a second horse behind him. She knew him by sight, though they had never spoken more than a polite greeting in passing. He owned a ranch a few miles outside of town, a substantial spread where he ran cattle and horses. He was in his late 20s, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of strong coffee. There was dust on his clothes and his face was weathered from long days in the sun. "Mr. Garrison," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. He dismounted in one fluid motion and stood before her, hat in his hands. "I heard about Mr. Harrison passing. I am sorry for your loss. Thank you." She did not trust herself to say more. Frank looked at the carpetbag, then at the house behind her, then back at her face. His expression was thoughtful. "I also heard his nephew turned you out." Heat flooded her cheeks, so the whole town would know of her shame by nightfall. News travels quickly, too quickly in a town this size. He was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. "Miss Owens, I find myself in need of some help out at my ranch. My housekeeper left last month to live with her daughter in Salt Lake City, and I have been managing poorly on my own. I can offer you room and board, plus $20 a month. It is honest work, and you would have your own quarters separate from the main house." Lydia stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. "You are offering me employment." "I am." His gaze was direct and honest. "I will not pretend it is easy work. The house needs a firm hand, and there is cooking and laundry and mending. I have 3 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse, and they expect hot meals. But you would be treated with respect, and you would have security." "Why?" The word came out before she could stop it. "You do not know me." "I know you kept Mr. Harrison's house running smoothly for 3 years. I know you nursed him when he was sick, even when it meant exposing yourself to illness. I know you are honest and hardworking." He paused. "And I know what it is like to have the ground cut out from under you through no fault of your own." There was something in his voice that made her look at him more carefully. She saw the weariness around his eyes, the set of his jaw that spoke of someone who had weathered his own storms. This was not a man offering charity out of pity. This was a man who genuinely needed help and saw in her someone capable of providing it. "When would you need me to start?" she asked quietly. A hint of a smile touched his mouth. "How does right now sound? I can take you out to the ranch, show you around, and you can decide if it suits you. If it does not, I will bring you back to town tomorrow and help you find something else." Lydia looked down at the carpet bag in her hand, then at the house she had just left, then at the vast blue sky stretching overhead. She thought about Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house and the saloon and the uncertain future that awaited her in town. Then she looked at Frank Garrison, at his honest eyes and work-worn hands, and made her decision. "That sounds acceptable, Mr. Garrison." "Frank," he said, "if you are going to be working for me, we can dispense with formality. Then you must call me Lydia." He nodded once, then took her carpet bag and secured it to his saddle. "Have you ridden much?" "Not recently, but I know how." "Good. This mare is gentle. Her name is Daisy." He helped her mount, his hands respectful and brief, then swung up onto his own horse. They rode out of Parowan, heading west, where the land opened up into rolling grassland dotted with sage and juniper. The afternoon sun was warm but not oppressive, and a breeze carried the scent of wild flowers and earth. Lydia found herself relaxing slightly as they rode. The rhythm of the horse beneath her and the wide open space around her easing some of the tightness in her chest. Frank did not press her with conversation, which she appreciated. Instead, he pointed out landmarks as they passed. The creek that ran year-round and provided water for the ranch, the stand of cottonwoods where deer liked to shelter in the heat of the day, the rocky outcropping where you could see for miles in every direction. After about an hour of riding, they crested a gentle rise, and Lydia saw the ranch spread out below them. It was more substantial than she had expected. A sturdy 2-story house with a wide porch, a large barn, several corrals, and a bunkhouse set off to one side. Everything looked well maintained but clearly needed a woman's touch. There were chickens scratching in the yard and horses in the nearest corral, and she could see cattle grazing on the hills beyond. "It is not fancy," Frank said, a note of pride in his voice, "but it is mine. Bought it 5 years ago and have been building it up ever since." "It is beautiful," Lydia said honestly. They rode down to the house and Frank helped her dismount. A man emerged from the barn, middle-aged with a graying beard, and Frank waved him over. "This is Charlie Mason, my foreman." "Charlie, this is Miss Lydia Owens. She will be taking over as housekeeper." Charlie touched his hat brim respectfully. "Pleased to meet you, miss. Lord knows we need someone who can cook better than Frank here. I have been suffering through his biscuits for a month now." Frank gave him a good-natured glare. "My biscuits are not that bad." "They could be used as doorstops," Charlie said cheerfully, "or weapons in a pinch." Despite everything, Lydia felt a smile tug at her mouth. There was an easy camaraderie between the two men that spoke of years of working together and genuine friendship. Frank led her up to the house and opened the door, then stepped aside to let her enter first. The interior was dim after the bright sunshine, and it took her eyes a moment to adjust. She found herself in a large main room with a stone fireplace at one end and a dining table that could seat 8. Doorways led off to what she assumed were other rooms. Everything was clean enough, but there was a bachelor quality to the space. No curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor, nothing decorative or softening about it. "Kitchen is through here," Frank said, leading her through one of the doorways. The kitchen was spacious with a good cast iron stove, a pump for water, and plenty of work space. Dishes were stacked haphazardly and there were crumbs on the counter, but nothing that could not be set right with some effort. "Upstairs are 4 bedrooms," Frank continued. "I use one, and the others are empty. You can have your pick of them. There is also a small room off the kitchen that my previous housekeeper used, if you would prefer to be on the ground floor. May I see it?" He showed her a modest room with a single bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the red cliffs in the distance. It was simple but clean, and it had a door that closed, which meant privacy. For now, that was enough. "This will be fine," Lydia said. "Good." Frank cleared his throat, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "I should be clear about the sleeping arrangements. I keep my room upstairs and you will be down here. The bunkhouse is where Charlie and the other hands sleep. At no point will you be asked or expected to do anything beyond keeping house and cooking. Your person and your privacy will be respected. I want you to feel safe here." The careful way he said it, the earnestness in his eyes, told Lydia that he understood her vulnerability in coming to work for a man she barely knew on an isolated ranch. It also told her that he was the kind of man who thought about such things, who cared about doing right by those in his employ. "I appreciate you saying so," she said softly. He nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Are you hungry? I can make some food such as it is." "Why do not you let me do that?" Lydia set down her carpetbag. "If I am to be your housekeeper, I should start earning my keep." Frank looked like he wanted to argue, but then he smiled. "I will not say no to a decent meal. Let me bring in your bag and show you where things are, and then I will get out of your way." He was as good as his word. He showed her the pantry, which was better stocked than she expected, and explained that he made a trip to town for supplies every week. He pointed out where the dishes and utensils were kept, where the linens were stored, and how the stove drew best. Then he excused himself to tend to the horses, leaving her alone to acquaint herself with her new domain. Lydia stood in the middle of the kitchen and took a deep breath. This morning she had woken in Mr. Harrison's house with her whole world intact. By afternoon she had been thrown out with nothing. And now, as evening approached, she found herself in a strange house on an unfamiliar ranch, employed by a man she did not know. It was terrifying and overwhelming, but it was also something else. It was a chance. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. By the time the sun was setting, she had prepared a simple meal of salt pork, beans, biscuits, and gravy. It was nothing fancy, but it was hot and filling. She set the table in the main room and called the men in for supper. Frank came in with Charlie and 2 younger ranch hands, all of them dusty and tired from a day's work. They introduced themselves as Pete and Hank, both in their early 20s, both clearly surprised and pleased to see a woman in the house. They washed up at the pump outside and then sat down at the table with the careful manners of men who were not used to eating in polite company. Lydia served the food and then hesitated, unsure if she should sit with them or eat in the kitchen. Frank caught her eye and gestured to an empty chair. "Please join us. You are not a servant here, Lydia. You are part of this household." She sat, feeling awkward but also touched by his insistence on including her. The men ate with the focused intensity of people who did hard physical labor, and the compliments they paid her cooking were clearly heartfelt. "This is the best meal I have had in weeks," Charlie said, reaching for a third biscuit. "No offense, boss." "None taken," Frank said. "I know my limitations in the kitchen." "You got other talents," Pete said loyally, "like roping and riding and fixing things." "Yeah, just not cooking," Hank added, grinning. The easy banter around the table helped Lydia relax. These were good men, she realized. Rough around the edges perhaps, but decent and honest. She could work here. She could make this her home, at least for now. After supper, the hands returned to the bunkhouse, and Frank helped her clear the dishes, which surprised her. "You do not need to do that," she protested. "It is no trouble." He stacked plates with the efficiency of someone who had been doing for himself for a while. "Besides, I thought we could talk about the routine around here, so you know what to expect." They worked side by side as he explained the rhythm of the ranch. The hands were up before dawn and out working by first light. They expected breakfast at sunrise, dinner at midday, and supper after the day's work was done. Laundry was done once a week, and mending was always needed. The chickens needed tending, and there was a vegetable garden that had been badly neglected. "I will not lie to you," Frank said as he dried a plate. "It is a lot of work for one person. If it becomes too much, you tell me and we will figure something out. I will not have you running yourself into the ground." "I am not afraid of hard work," Lydia said. "I did not think you were." He set the plate on the shelf. "But I also know the difference between hard work and impossible demands. My mother used to run a household 3 times this size with help from her daughters. I am not expecting miracles." The mention of his mother reminded Lydia how little she knew about him. "Is your family here in Utah?" "No, they are back in Missouri. My parents have a farm there, and my 2 sisters are married with families of their own." He was quiet for a moment. "I came west 5 years ago looking for something different. I wanted land of my own, a chance to build something from the ground up. My father thought I was crazy to leave, but he eventually understood." "Do you miss them?" "Every day, but I also know I made the right choice. This land gets into your blood if you let it." He glanced at her. "What about you? Do you have family?" "My parents are both gone. I was an only child." The familiar ache of loneliness settled in her chest. "Mr. Harrison's household was the closest thing I had to a home these past 3 years. Then I am glad you have a place here now." Frank said it simply, but there was sincerity in his voice that made her throat tighten. They finished the dishes in companionable silence, and then Frank bid her good night and headed upstairs. Lydia went to her small room and unpacked her carpetbag, hanging her dresses on pegs and arranging her few belongings on the dresser. It was not much, but it was hers. She lay in the narrow bed and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night. The lowing of cattle in the distance, the creak of wood settling, the whisper of wind through the eaves. She thought about everything that had happened in one impossible day, and she thought about Frank Garrison's steady presence and quiet kindness. Then she closed her eyes and, despite all the uncertainty, fell into a deep sleep. The next weeks fell into a rhythm. Lydia woke before dawn to prepare breakfast, feeding the men substantial portions of eggs, bacon, biscuits, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. She packed dinner for them to take out to wherever they were working, then spent the morning cleaning and mending. Afternoons were for laundry or baking or tending the garden, which she was slowly coaxing back to life. In the evenings, she prepared supper and then had a few hours to herself before exhaustion pulled her to bed. It was hard work, harder than she had done in Mr. Harrison's house, but it was also satisfying in a way that surprised her. There was something deeply rewarding about seeing the house transform under her care, about watching the men's faces light up when she put a good meal on the table, about falling into bed at night with the bone-deep tiredness that came from honest labor. And then there was Frank. She found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, studying the way he moved with easy confidence, the way he spoke to his horses with the same respect he showed to people, the way his rare smiles transformed his entire face. He was unfailingly kind to her, always asking if she needed anything, always quick with a word of appreciation, always respectful of her space and her time. But there was also something else growing between them, something she was almost afraid to name. She noticed the way his eyes lingered on her when she served breakfast. She caught him watching her hang laundry one afternoon, his expression unreadable. And there were small moments of connection. Their hands brushing when she passed him a plate, the way he always held the door for her, the quiet conversations they shared in the evening when the work was done. One evening in late May, a month after she had arrived, Frank found her in the garden as she was pulling weeds. The sun was low and golden, casting long shadows across the earth. "Need any help?" he asked. "I am nearly finished." She sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead. "But I was thinking it would be good to plant some more vegetables. If you can spare the space, we could have fresh produce all summer. Plant whatever you like. This is your domain." He crouched down beside her, examining the neat rows of seedlings. "You have done wonders with this place, Lydia. I do not think I have properly thanked you for that." "You pay me," she said, uncomfortable with praise. "That is thanks enough. It is more than just the work you do." Frank picked up a clod of dirt, crumbling it between his fingers. "The house feels like a home now. I did not realize how much I was missing that until you arrived." Her heart began to beat faster. "I am glad I can provide that. Is it enough for you, being here, I mean? Are you happy?" The question surprised her with its directness. She looked at him, at the genuine concern in his eyes, and decided to be honest. "I am happier than I expected to be. When Mr. Harrison's nephew turned me out, I thought my life was over. I thought I would end up in some desperate situation, taking whatever work I could find just to survive. But this—" she gestured at the garden, at the house beyond, at the land stretching in every direction. "This is good, better than good." "But," Frank said, hearing what she had not said, "but sometimes I wonder what I am building toward." The words came out in a rush. "I am 23 years old, and I have nothing to show for my life, except the ability to keep house for other people. I am grateful for this position, truly I am. But I cannot help wondering if this is all there will ever be for me." Frank was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face. "What do you want, Lydia? If you could have anything, what would it be?" No one had ever asked her that before, not her parents, who had expected her to marry whoever made a suitable offer. Not Mr. Harrison, who had needed her labor more than her dreams. But Frank asked, and he looked like he genuinely wanted to know the answer. "I want to belong somewhere," she said softly. "Not as a servant or an employee, but as someone who has a stake in the place. I want to build something that lasts, something that matters. I want—" She trailed off, unable to voice the deepest longing, someone to love who would love her in return, a family of her own, a future that was more than just survival. "You want a home," Frank said. "A real home." "Yes." He reached out and covered her hand with his palm warm and calloused against her skin. "You have a home here, Lydia, for as long as you want it. And if someday you want more than that, if you want to be a true partner in this place rather than an employee, well—" He paused, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "I would not be opposed to that conversation." Lydia's breath caught. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, and saw something in his expression that made her pulse race. "Frank, I know it is too soon, he said quickly. "You have only been here a month and you hardly know me. I am not trying to pressure you or make you uncomfortable. I just want you to know that I see you, Lydia. Not just as someone who keeps my house and cooks my meals, but as a woman who is strong and capable and beautiful. And if you ever wanted more than just an employer and employee relationship, I would be honored to explore that possibility." Her mind was reeling. A month ago, she had been destitute and desperate. Now she had a good man telling her in his careful way that he cared for her. It was too much, too fast, too overwhelming, but it was also exactly what she wanted. "I see you too," she whispered. "I have been trying not to, because I thought it was foolish to hope for something more. But I do see you, Frank, and I like what I see." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Then maybe we can take this slow, get to know each other properly and see where it leads." "I would like that." They stayed there in the garden as the sun set, hands still joined, talking about everything and nothing. Frank told her about growing up in Missouri, about the restlessness that had driven him west, about his dreams for the ranch. Lydia told him about her childhood, about losing her parents, about the loneliness of being dependent on the charity of others. And with each shared story, each quiet confession, the connection between them deepened. When full darkness fell, Frank walked her back to the house. At the door to her room, he paused. "Thank you for trusting me with your hopes," he said. "I do not take that lightly. Thank you for asking." She looked up at him, at the strong lines of his face softened by the lamplight. "Good night, Frank." "Good night, Lydia." After that evening, something shifted between them. They were still employer and employee, still careful to maintain propriety, but there was also a new awareness, a sense of possibility that colored every interaction. Frank found excuses to be near her, helping with tasks he had never assisted with before. Lydia caught herself humming as she worked, feeling lighter than she had in years. The ranch hands noticed, of course. Charlie made a few pointed comments about how the boss seemed to be smiling more these days, and Pete and Hank exchanged knowing looks whenever Frank and Lydia were in the same room. But it was all good-natured teasing, and no one said anything disrespectful. In early June, Frank asked Lydia if she would like to go riding with him on Sunday afternoon, her one half-day off each week. She agreed, and they rode out into the hills with a picnic lunch she had prepared. They found a spot under some cottonwoods near the creek, and they ate and talked and laughed in a way that felt wonderfully natural. "Tell me something about yourself that I would never guess," Frank said, leaning back against a tree trunk. Lydia thought for a moment. "I used to want to be a teacher. When I was a girl, I loved books and learning, and I dreamed of having a classroom of my own." "Why did you not pursue it?" "Money, mostly. Teacher training costs money, and after my father died, there was none to spare. I needed to work, and housekeeping was the most respectable option available." She plucked at the grass. "What about you? What did you want to be?" "This," Frank said simply. "I always wanted to be a rancher. From the time I was a boy, I loved working with animals and being outdoors. My father wanted me to stay and help him with his farm, but I wanted something bigger, wilder, so I came west and found it." "Do you ever regret it? Leaving your family?" "Sometimes. I miss them, and I wish they could see what I have built here, but I do not regret following my dream." He looked at her intently. "Do you regret the choices you have made?" "I used to. I used to think I had wasted my life, that I had settled for less than I deserved. But being here with you—" She felt her cheeks flush. "I am starting to think everything happened exactly as it should." Frank reached over and took her hand. "I am glad you feel that way, because I cannot imagine this place without you now." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, listening to the gurgle of the creek and the rustle of leaves overhead. It was a perfect moment, and Lydia wanted to hold on to it forever. As summer deepened, their relationship continued to grow. They spent evenings on the porch after supper, talking as the stars came out. Frank taught her to ride better, taking her on longer trips across the ranch land. Lydia introduced small touches to the house that made it more of a home. Curtains for the windows, a tablecloth for the dining table, wildflowers in a jar on the kitchen windowsill. And slowly, carefully, they began to touch more. A hand on the small of her back as he passed. His arm around her shoulders when a summer storm came through, and thunder shook the house. Her fingers brushing through his hair one evening when he came in with a cut on his forehead, and she cleaned and bandaged it. In July, Frank took her to town for the Independence Day celebration. It was the first time they had appeared together publicly, and Lydia was conscious of the curious looks they received. But Frank kept her close, his hand at her elbow, making it clear to anyone watching that she was under his protection. They watched the foot races and the horse competitions, ate picnic food and listened to speeches from local politicians. As evening fell, someone brought out a fiddle and people began to dance in the town square. Frank turned to her, suddenly nervous. "Would you dance with me?" "I would be honored." He led her into the crowd of dancers and took her in his arms, one hand at her waist and the other holding hers. He was not a graceful dancer, but he was sincere, and being held by him made Lydia's heart race. "I have wanted to do this for weeks," Frank said quietly, his mouth close to her ear. "Hold you like this." "I have wanted it too," she admitted. They swayed together as the fiddle played a slow tune, and Lydia let herself imagine what it would be like to have this always. To be held by Frank not just for one dance but for a lifetime. When the song ended, Frank did not immediately let her go. He looked down at her, his eyes dark and intense. "Lydia, I need to tell you something." Her heart was pounding. "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you." "No, that is not right. I have already fallen. I love you." He said it plainly, without artifice or poetry, but the honesty in his voice made it more romantic than any flowery speech could have been. "I know we have not known each other long, but I am certain of this. You are the woman I want to build my life with." Tears pricked at Lydia's eyes. "I love you too. I think I have from almost the beginning, but I was afraid to hope." "Then do not be afraid." Frank cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that spilled over. "I want to marry you, Lydia. I want you as my partner, my wife, the mother of my children someday. I want to grow old with you on that ranch. Will you have me?" Around them, people were dancing and laughing, but Lydia only saw Frank, only heard his voice, only felt his hands gentle on her face. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with joy. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, right there in the middle of the town square with everyone watching. It was a chaste kiss, mindful of propriety, but it was full of promise and love and commitment. When they pulled apart, Lydia was laughing through her tears and Frank was grinning like he had just won the greatest prize in the world. Charlie, who had been watching from the sidelines, let out a whoop. "About time, boss. I was beginning to think you would never ask her." The other ranch hands joined in the congratulations, and several townspeople came over to offer their best wishes. Mrs. Fletcher from the boarding house hugged Lydia and said she could not think of a better match. Even the pastor, a kindly older man named Reverend Thompson, came over to shake Frank's hand and tell them he would be honored to perform the ceremony. They set the wedding for the first Saturday in August, which gave them 3 weeks to prepare. It would be a simple affair, held at the ranch with just close friends and neighbors in attendance. Lydia did not need anything elaborate. All she needed was Frank and the promise of a future together. Those 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Lydia sewed herself a new dress for the wedding, a simple but elegant creation in soft blue cotton. Frank spruced up the house, fixing things that had needed attention, and even building a new bookshelf for the main room because he remembered her saying she loved to read. Charlie and the hands helped clean up the barn and the yard, and several neighbor women came over to assist with baking and decorating. The night before the wedding, Frank found Lydia on the porch, looking out at the darkening sky. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, sitting down beside her. "Not even for a moment." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I was just thinking about how much my life has changed in such a short time. 4 months ago I had nothing. Tomorrow I will have everything." "We will have everything," Frank corrected. "This is not me giving you a new life, Lydia. This is us creating one together." She turned to look at him. "You are a good man, Frank Garrison. I am just a man who was lucky enough to find you." He kissed her forehead. "Get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." "A wonderful day," she said. "The best day," he agreed. The wedding dawned clear and bright, one of those perfect summer mornings when the world seems full of possibility. Lydia woke early and dressed with care, her hands shaking slightly as she fastened the buttons on her new dress. Mrs. Fletcher had come to stay the night and act as her attendant, and the older woman fussed over her like a mother, arranging her hair and making sure everything was perfect. "You look beautiful, my dear," Mrs. Fletcher said, tears in her eyes. "Frank Garrison is a lucky man." "I am the lucky one," Lydia said. The ceremony was held in the main room of the house, which had been decorated with wildflowers and ribbons. About 20 people were in attendance. The ranch hands, several neighboring ranchers and their families, Reverend Thompson, and a few folks from town who had befriended either Frank or Lydia over the years. Frank stood at the front of the room in a new suit, his hair neatly combed for once, looking both nervous and elated. When Lydia walked in on Charlie's arm, the foreman having agreed to give her away, Frank's face lit up with such pure joy that Lydia felt tears threaten again. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor and cherish each other for as long as they both lived. Frank's hands were warm and solid as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, and Lydia's voice did not waver when she pledged her life to his. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thompson said, beaming. "Frank, you may kiss your bride." Frank did, sweetly and thoroughly, and the room erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration that followed was joyful and raucous. There was food in abundance: roasted beef, vegetables from the garden, bread and cakes and pies. Someone had brought a fiddle and another person a guitar, and soon there was music and dancing. Frank and Lydia had their first dance as husband and wife, and then they were separated as everyone wanted to dance with the bride and groom. As the afternoon wore on and the sun began to set, guests gradually took their leave, heading home before darkness fell. Charlie and the hands tactfully announced they would be spending the night in town, giving the newlyweds their privacy. Mrs. Fletcher gave Lydia one last hug and then left with Reverend Thompson, who was driving her back to her boarding house. And then, finally, Frank and Lydia were alone. They stood in the main room, which was a mess of plates and decorations and flower petals. Frank looked at Lydia and started to laugh. "We should probably clean this up," he said. "It can wait until tomorrow." Lydia went to him, sliding her arms around his waist. "We are married, Frank. You are my husband, and you are my wife." He held her close, his voice full of wonder. "I still cannot quite believe it. Believe it." She stood on her toes and kissed him. "This is real. We are real." He returned the kiss with a passion that made her knees weak, his hands tangling in her hair, pulling her closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Frank took her hand and led her toward the stairs. "Come with me, Mrs. Garrison." Lydia followed him up to his room, which would now be their room. He had prepared it carefully, she noticed. Fresh linens on the bed, flowers on the dresser, candles waiting to be lit. It was clear he had put thought into making this night special. "I want you to know something," Frank said, suddenly serious. "I will never take you for granted, Lydia. Every day for the rest of my life, I will wake up grateful that you chose me. And I will wake up grateful that you gave me a home when I had nothing," Lydia said. "That you saw me not as charity case but as someone worth loving. You have always been worth loving." Frank cupped her face, his touch gentle. "You are strong and kind and beautiful, and I am the luckiest man in the world." He kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. They had made their vows before God and witnesses, and now they would seal those vows in the most intimate way possible. And as Frank lifted her in his arms and carried her to the bed, as he loved her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes, Lydia knew with absolute certainty that she was finally, truly home. The early days of their marriage were full of joy and discovery. They learned each other's rhythms and preferences, the small intimacies that come with sharing a life. Lydia continued to manage the household, but now it was her house, not just her workplace. She rearranged things to suit herself, planted a larger garden, even brought home a kitten from town that she named Clementine. Frank involved her in decisions about the ranch, asking her opinion on everything from which cattle to sell to whether they should invest in new equipment. He made it clear that she was his partner in every sense, and Lydia found herself falling more in love with him with each passing day. In September, they took a trip to Salt Lake City, staying in a hotel for 3 nights. It was Lydia's first real trip since coming west, and Frank delighted in showing her the sights. The great temple under construction, the bustling streets, the shops full of goods from back east and even from overseas. He bought her a new winter coat and a set of books she had been wanting, insisting that she deserved to be spoiled. "You do too much for me," Lydia protested as they walked back to the hotel, her arms full of packages. "Impossible," Frank said. "I could never do enough to repay you for what you have given me." "What have I given you? I am just a housekeeper who happened to need work." Frank stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. "You gave me a reason to come home at the end of the day. You gave me someone to dream with and plan with and build a future with. You gave me love, Lydia. That is not nothing. That is everything." She kissed him right there on the street, not caring who saw. "I love you so much. I love you too. Now let us get these packages back to the room before you drop them." That night, as they lay in bed in the hotel room, Frank pulled her close and whispered, "I have been thinking about something." "What is it?" "I want us to have children. Not right away if you are not ready, but someday. I want to see you holding our baby. I want to teach our sons to ride and rope. I want to watch our daughters grow up strong and independent like their mother." Lydia felt a surge of warmth at his words. "I want that too. I want to fill that big house with children and laughter and love." "Then that is what we will do." Frank kissed the top of her head. "We will build the family neither of us had, and we will give them everything." Winter came to Parowan with snow that blanketed the valley in white. The ranch work slowed down and Frank spent more time in the house, which Lydia loved. They passed the long evenings reading aloud to each other, playing cards or simply talking by the fire. Christmas was a quiet affair, just the two of them and the ranch hands, but it was perfect in its simplicity. In February, Lydia realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another 2 weeks to be certain, and then she told Frank over breakfast one morning. "I think I am with child," she said, her heart pounding. Frank dropped his fork with a clatter. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor. All the signs are there." He was around the table in an instant, pulling her up into a fierce embrace. "This is the best news. You are going to be a mother. We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Lydia asked, even though his reaction made the answer obvious. Happy does not even begin to cover it. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes shining. "We need to take care of you now. No more heavy lifting. You should rest more. We should get the doctor out here to make sure everything is all right. Frank, women have babies all the time. I am not fragile. You are carrying our child. You are the most precious thing in the world to me." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. "I am going to take care of you so well, Lydia. I promise." And he did. Frank became almost comically protective, hovering whenever she did anything remotely strenuous, insisting she put her feet up, making sure she ate enough. Lydia found it both endearing and occasionally frustrating, but she could not deny the love behind his fussing. As spring arrived and her belly began to swell, Lydia felt a deep contentment settle over her. She was healthy, her baby was growing, and she had a husband who adored her. The ranch was thriving, and there was talk of expanding the herd. Everything she had ever wanted was coming true. In late May, they learned that Charlie's wife, who lived in Salt Lake City, had passed away. The foreman was devastated, and he took 2 weeks off to handle her affairs and mourn. When he returned, he was quiet and sad, and Lydia went out of her way to make sure he was eating properly and taking care of himself. "You are a good woman, Lydia," Charlie said one evening. "Frank is blessed to have you." "We are blessed to have each other," Lydia said. "And we are blessed to have friends like you. You are family, Charlie." The older man's eyes grew damp. "That means more than you know." As summer approached and Lydia's due date drew near, Frank became even more protective. He insisted on being within shouting distance of the house at all times, and he made sure the doctor in town knew to be ready at a moment's notice. Lydia tried to assure him that first babies often took their time, but Frank was not taking any chances. On a hot day in early August, exactly 1 year after their wedding, Lydia's pains began. Frank immediately rode to town to fetch the doctor, leaving Lydia in the capable hands of Mrs. Fletcher, who had come to stay for the last few weeks of the pregnancy. "You are doing fine, my dear, Mrs. Fletcher said, wiping Lydia's forehead with a cool cloth. "Just breathe through the pains." The labor was long and difficult, lasting well into the night. Frank paced outside the bedroom, occasionally bursting in to check on Lydia despite Mrs. Fletcher's attempts to shoo him away. And finally, just before dawn, with one last mighty push, their baby was born. "It is a boy," the doctor announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A healthy boy with a good, strong cry." Lydia collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but elated. Mrs. Fletcher cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Lydia's arms. "Oh," Lydia breathed, looking down at the tiny, perfect face. "Oh, Frank, look at him." Frank was at her side instantly, his own face wet with tears. "He is beautiful. He is perfect. You are perfect." He kissed Lydia's forehead, then gently touched the baby's soft hair. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Lydia knew. "Thomas," she said. "After my father, Thomas Garrison." "Thomas," Frank repeated, trying it out. "I like it. Thomas Frank Garrison." "Welcome to the world, Thomas," Lydia whispered to her son. "You are so loved." The next months were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings, but they were also the happiest of Lydia's life. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong, and Frank proved to be a devoted father. He would get up in the night to walk with Thomas when the baby was fussy, and Lydia often found him just standing over the cradle, watching their son sleep with an expression of pure wonder. As Thomas grew, the ranch continued to prosper. Frank hired another hand to help with the increased workload, and they built a new barn to accommodate their expanding herd. Money was not plentiful, but there was enough, and they had security. When Thomas was 18 months old, Lydia discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in June of 1885, she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Frank's mother. Sarah had Frank's dark hair and Lydia's green eyes, and she was adored by everyone from the moment she arrived. "We are blessed," Frank said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Thomas toddle around the yard while Sarah slept in Lydia's arms. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life." "Our life," Lydia corrected gently. "We built this together." "We did." Frank reached over and took her free hand. "Do you remember the day we met? You were standing in front of Mr. Harrison's house with your carpetbag, looking lost and scared. And you offered me work." Lydia smiled at the memory. "You said I had a place here. I knew even then that you were special. I did not know I would fall in love with you, but I knew you belonged here." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it. "Thank you for taking a chance on me, Lydia. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible. Thank you for loving me." She leaned over and kissed him softly. "This is everything I ever dreamed of and more." As the years passed, Thomas and Sarah grew into lively, happy children. Thomas had Frank's quiet strength and love of the land, and by the time he was 5, he was insisting on helping with the ranch work. Sarah was spirited and curious, always asking questions and getting into mischief, and both Frank and Lydia adored her fierce independence. In 1887, Lydia gave birth to their third child, another son they named Peter. And 2 years later, their family was completed with the arrival of twin daughters, Emma and Grace. The house that had once seemed too big was now filled with noise and activity. There were always children underfoot, always someone needing attention, always laundry to be done and meals to be cooked. But Lydia had never been happier. This was what she had longed for: a family, a home, a purpose beyond mere survival. Frank continued to be a loving husband and devoted father. He taught Thomas and Peter to ride and rope, and he made sure the girls knew they could do anything their brothers could do. He was involved in the community, serving on the town council and helping neighbors when they needed it. And through it all, he made sure Lydia knew every single day how much he loved and valued her. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Frank gave Lydia a beautiful journal bound in leather. "I know you have always loved words," he said. "I thought you might want to write down our story so our children and grandchildren will know how we met and fell in love." Lydia ran her hand over the smooth leather, touched by his thoughtfulness. "It is a good story, is it not? The best story." Frank pulled her into his arms. "The story of how a woman with nothing and a cowboy with a ranch built a life together. The story of how love can grow in the most unlikely circumstances. The story of how you gave me everything when I thought I had lost it all," Lydia said softly. "No," Frank said, tilting her chin up so their eyes met. "The story of how we gave each other everything. You were not the only one who had nothing that day, Lydia. I had land and cattle and a house, but I did not have a home. I did not have love. I did not have a future worth living for. You gave me all of that." They stood there in each other's arms, 10 years of shared life and love between them, and 5 children sleeping upstairs who were the living proof of their commitment to each other. "I would do it all again," Lydia whispered. "Every moment, every hardship, every joy. I would choose you every single time." "And I would choose you," Frank said. "From that first day until the last day of my life, I will always choose you." As the 1890s approached, the Garrison Ranch was one of the most successful in the area. Frank's reputation as a fair and honest rancher meant he was respected by everyone, and Lydia's kindness and generosity made their home a gathering place for neighbors and friends. Their children were growing up healthy and happy, surrounded by love and the wild beauty of the Utah landscape. On a summer evening in 1893, Lydia stood on the porch and looked out at the land she now thought of as hers. Thomas, now 11, was helping Frank with the horses. Sarah, 8, was teaching her younger siblings to catch fireflies in the gathering dusk. Peter and the twins were laughing and running through the grass, their joy evident in every movement. Lydia thought back to that terrible day in April 1882, when she had stood in front of Mr. Harrison's house with nothing but $12 and a carpetbag. She thought about the fear and desperation she had felt, the certainty that her life was over. And then she thought about Frank riding up on his horse, offering her work, offering her hope, offering her a future she could never have imagined. She had not known then that she was about to meet the love of her life. She had not known that in a little over a year she would be married to a good man who cherished her. She had not known that she would bear 5 children and build a home that was filled with love and laughter. She had not known that losing everything would lead to gaining everything that truly mattered. "What are you thinking about?" Frank asked, coming to stand beside her on the porch. "How grateful I am," Lydia said simply, "for all of this, for you." He wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her close. "I am the grateful one. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." They stood together and watched their children play in the fading light, and Lydia felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. This was her life. This was her family. This was her home. And it all started with a cowboy who looked at a woman with nothing and said, "You have got work here now." Those simple words had changed everything. They had led to employment, then friendship, then love, then marriage, then children, then a life so rich and full that Lydia sometimes could hardly believe it was real, but it was real. Every moment, every blessing, every challenge they had faced together had been real. And as Frank kissed the top of her head and their children called for them to come join the game, Lydia knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single thing about the path that had led her here. Years continued to pass in the rhythm of ranch life. The children grew and flourished. Thomas became Frank's right hand on the ranch, learning everything his father could teach him about cattle and horses and land management. Sarah surprised everyone by developing a passion for medicine, and Frank and Lydia saved every spare dollar to send her to school in Salt Lake City to train as a nurse. Peter showed a talent for working with wood and began building furniture in his spare time, beautiful pieces that soon were in demand throughout the territory. The twins, Emma and Grace, were as different as night and day, Emma preferring to help her mother in the house and garden while Grace insisted on working alongside her brothers in the fields. In 1898, Thomas married a sweet girl named Margaret from a neighboring ranch, and they built a house on Garrison land. A year later, their first grandchild was born, a boy named Frank after his grandfather. Holding that baby in her arms, seeing Thomas and Margaret gaze at their son with the same wonder she and Frank had felt with their own firstborn, Lydia was overcome with emotion. "We started something beautiful," she told Frank that night as they lay in bed. "Look at what we created. Not just our children, but this legacy, this family that will go on long after we are gone. All because you took a chance on a lonely cowboy with a run-down ranch," Frank said, his voice thick with feeling. "All because that cowboy saw a desperate woman and offered her kindness when she needed it most," Lydia countered. "We saved each other, Frank. That is what we did." As the new century dawned, the Garrison family celebrated with a huge gathering. All 5 children were there, along with Thomas's wife and baby, and dozens of friends and neighbors. They roasted a whole steer and had music and dancing that lasted well into the night. And at midnight, as everyone counted down to the year 1900, Frank took Lydia in his arms and kissed her. "Here is to the new century," he said, "and to spending it with you." "To us," Lydia agreed. "To our family, to this life we built from nothing." The early years of the new century brought more changes. Sarah completed her nursing training and came home to open a small clinic in Parowan, providing medical care to the community. Peter married and had 3 children in quick succession. Emma became engaged to the son of the local banker, and Grace shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to homestead her own piece of land rather than marry, which Frank and Lydia supported wholeheartedly. By 1905, Frank and Lydia were grandparents 7 times over, with more grandchildren on the way. The ranch had been divided to give Thomas his own section to manage, and there was talk of Peter taking over another portion. The Garrison name was respected throughout southern Utah, synonymous with hard work, integrity, and family values. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered for a celebration. The house was bursting with people, 3 generations of Garrisons along with friends who had become like family over the years. Charlie Mason was there, now in his 70s but still spry, and Mrs. Fletcher had made the trip from town despite her advanced age. After the meal, Frank stood and raised his glass. "I want to say something," he announced, and the room fell quiet. 25 years ago, I married the woman of my dreams. I knew I loved her, but I had no idea just how much she would change my life. Lydia, you have given me everything a man could want. A home, a family, a purpose, and a love that has sustained me through every challenge and celebrated with me through every joy. You are the best part of me, and I thank God every day that you said yes when I asked you to marry me." Lydia was crying openly now, and not just her. Several of their children had tears streaming down their faces, and even Charlie was wiping at his eyes. "I love you, Lydia Garrison," Frank said. "Today, tomorrow, and always." Lydia stood and went to him, and he took her in his arms as the room erupted in applause. She looked up at this man who had saved her, who had loved her, who had built a life with her, and she could hardly speak through her tears. "I love you too," she managed. "More than words can say." They kissed, and their children cheered, and Lydia felt the warmth of family and home wrap around her like a blanket. The years continued their steady march. By 1910, Frank and Lydia were in their early 50s, still healthy and active but beginning to feel the weight of age. Thomas had taken over most of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, and Frank was content to step back and let his son lead. Lydia still managed the household but had help now from Emma, who lived nearby with her husband and children. They took up new hobbies in their semi-retirement. Frank taught himself carpentry, building toys for the grandchildren and furniture for the house. Lydia returned to her love of reading and even started a small lending library in Parowan, collecting books and making them available to anyone who wanted to borrow them. It was her way of pursuing the teaching dream she had abandoned so long ago, and she found deep satisfaction in fostering a love of learning in others. On quiet evenings, they would sit on the porch as they had done for decades, watching the sun set over the red cliffs and talking about their day. The conversations were comfortable and easy, the product of nearly 30 years of marriage and a deep understanding of each other. "You ever miss the early days?" Frank asked one evening. "When it was just the 2 of us, before the children and the grandchildren and all the responsibilities." Lydia thought about it carefully. "I loved those days. They were special and important, the foundation of everything that came after, but I do not miss them because I love what we have now even more. I love seeing our children happy and successful. I love holding our grandchildren. I love knowing that we built something that will last long after we are gone. I feel the same way. Frank reached over and took her hand, as he had done thousands of times before. Though I do sometimes miss having you all to myself, Lydia laughed. We have each other every night when the house is quiet. That is enough for me. More than enough, Frank agreed. In 1915, they celebrated their 30th anniversary with another large gathering. This time, there were 13 grandchildren ranging in age from infant to teenager, and the house was even more chaotic and wonderful than it had been a decade earlier. Lydia looked around at all the faces, all the love, and felt her heart might burst with joy. Did you ever imagine this? She asked Frank as they sat together watching the grandchildren play. When you offered me that job all those years ago, did you have any idea it would lead to this? I hoped, Frank said honestly. From the moment I saw you standing there with that carpet bag, looking so brave despite being so scared, I hoped. I hoped you would say yes to the job. I hoped you would give me a chance. I hoped you might love me back. But this, he gestured at the roomful of family. This exceeded my wildest dreams. Mine too, Lydia said softly. I went from having nothing and no one to having everything and everyone. How did I get so lucky? It was not luck, Frank said firmly. It was choice. You chose to take a chance on me. I chose to see your worth when others overlooked it. We chose each other every day, through good times and hard times, and we built this life together one choice at a time. Lydia knew he was right. Their love story was not about luck or fate or chance. It was about two people who had seen something worth fighting for and had committed themselves to building it, brick by brick, day by day, year by year. As the 1910s turned into the 1920s, Frank and Lydia entered their 60s. They were grandparents and great-grandparents now, the patriarchs of a large and thriving family. The ranch had continued to grow and prosper under Thomas's management, and all of their children were settled and happy in their own lives. Frank's health began to decline slightly. Nothing serious but the inevitable slowing that comes with age. Lydia developed arthritis in her hands, which made some tasks difficult, but she adapted and kept going. They leaned on each other more now, each supporting the other through the challenges of growing older. On a cool evening in October 1922, 40 years after that fateful day when they met, Frank and Lydia sat on their porch wrapped in blankets and watched the stars come out. They had just finished hosting Sunday dinner for the family, and the house was finally quiet again. 40 years, Frank said, his voice filled with wonder. We have been together for 40 years. The best 40 years of my life, Lydia said. Mine too. He was quiet for a moment. I have been thinking about something lately. What is that? About that day when I found you in town. About how easily I could have ridden past, could have minded my own business, could have decided hiring a housekeeper was too much trouble. He shook his head. I could have missed out on all of this because I was too lazy or too cautious or too set in my ways. But you did not, Lydia pointed out. You stopped. You offered help. You took a chance. Because something told me to, Frank said. Some instinct or intuition or divine intervention. I do not know what to call it. But I am grateful every day that I listened to that voice telling me to stop and talk to you. Lydia felt tears prick at her eyes, as they so often did these days when she thought about their life together. I am grateful you listened too. You saved me that day, Frank. You truly saved me. And you saved me right back, Frank said, pulling her close. We saved each other, and then we built a life worth saving. They sat in comfortable silence, holding each other as the night deepened around them. Inside the house, the walls held 40 years of memories, laughter and tears, arguments and reconciliations, births and deaths, triumphs and failures. It had all happened here in this house that Frank built and Lydia made into a home. As the years moved toward the mid-1920s, Frank and Lydia continued to enjoy their later years surrounded by family and friends. They celebrated each new grandchild and great-grandchild. They attended weddings and christenings and graduations. They remained pillars of the Parowan community, respected and beloved by all who knew them. And through it all, their love for each other never wavered. They still held hands like young sweethearts. They still kissed each other goodnight without fail. They still told each other, "I love you," every single day, knowing that the words were precious and should never be taken for granted. On their 45th anniversary in 1927, surrounded by what seemed like half the town, Frank gave a speech that had everyone in tears. "When I was a young man with a struggling ranch and no one to share it with, I used to wonder if I would spend my whole life alone," he said. "And then God brought me Lydia. She came into my life with nothing but her courage and her dignity, and she gave me everything. She gave me love and partnership and children, and a legacy that will outlive us both. Every good thing in my life stems from the day I met her. So on this anniversary, I want to say thank you, Lydia, for 45 years of being the best wife, mother, grandmother, and friend a man could ask for. I love you more today than I did the day I married you, and I will love you until my last breath." Lydia could barely see through her tears, but she stood and went to him, and they held each other as their family and friends applauded. This was what love looked like after 45 years, weathered and tested, but stronger than ever. As the 1920s drew to a close, Frank and Lydia were in their 70s. They had slowed down considerably, spending most of their days on the porch or in the house, content to let the younger generations handle the work of the ranch and the demands of daily life. But they were still sharp-minded and engaged, still interested in the world around them, still deeply in love. One morning, in early spring of 1930, Lydia woke to find Frank had passed peacefully in his sleep beside her. For a long moment, she could not move, could not breathe, could not accept that he was gone. But then reality crashed over her, and she gathered him into her arms and wept. The funeral was one of the largest Parowan had ever seen. People came from all over the territory to pay their respects to Frank Garrison, a man who had been known for his integrity, his kindness, and his devotion to family. But no one mourned him more deeply than Lydia, who had lost not just her husband but her partner of 48 years. In the weeks and months that followed, Lydia struggled with her grief. The house felt empty without Frank's presence. The bed was too big for just her. Everything reminded her of him, and the pain was almost unbearable, but she was not alone. Her children surrounded her with love and support. Her grandchildren visited constantly, filling the house with the noise and life that had always defined it. And slowly, gradually, Lydia began to heal. She lived for another 10 years, dying peacefully in 1940 at the age of 80. Her children and grandchildren were with her at the end, holding her hands and telling her how much they loved her. And with her last breath, Lydia smiled, because she knew she was going to be with Frank again. They buried her next to him in the Parowan cemetery, under a large cottonwood tree with a view of the red cliffs in the distance. Their shared headstone bore a simple inscription: "Frank and Lydia Garrison, together forever." And in the years that followed, their descendants continued to tell the story of how they met, how they fell in love, and how they built a legacy that lasted for generations. It was a story of courage and kindness, of second chances and faith, of a woman with nothing and a cowboy who gave her everything. It was a story that began with tragedy but ended in triumph. A story that proved love could grow in the most unlikely places. A story that reminded everyone who heard it that sometimes the darkest moments in our lives are just the beginning of something beautiful. And it all started with 5 simple words. You have got work here now. Those words changed 2 lives and created a family that would endure for generations. A testament to the power of compassion, the strength of commitment, and the enduring nature of true love.